The first thing I saw wasn't the tow truck, but Karen Jenkins from our HOA across the street, pretending to be intensely interested in her prize-winning petunias. The second thing I saw was that tow truck lifting my 30-foot, 10-year, dream-in-the-making RV clean off my own driveway. And I swear, right when she thought I couldn't see, she looked up and I saw the faintest, most satisfied smirk I've ever seen on a human face. You know, as I'm standing there, watching my entire life's dream get hauled down the street like a piece of garbage, my brain just kind of short-circuited. All I could think was, how? How in the hell did it come to this? It wasn't like I just woke up one day and decided to piss off the neighborhood witch. This whole thing, this entire mess, it all started years ago with a promise. See, my job, I'm a logistics guy. That's a fancy way of saying I sit in a beige cubicle with 3 computer monitors and figure out how to get $1 million worth of machine parts from a factory in Ohio to a port in Singapore without it getting lost, stolen, or held up in customs. I map things out. I plan for contingencies. I live and breathe spreadsheets, shipping manifests, and color-coded timelines. My whole life is about making sure things get from point A to point B smoothly. The irony, and this is the part that really gets me, is that while I was orchestrating these grand voyages across the globe, I was completely stationary. My own point A was my desk, and point B was my couch. Year after year. I remember this one night, I came home late. Again. The kids were already asleep, and my wife, Laura, was at the kitchen table grading papers. She's a middle school teacher, a saint, really. She looked up at me with these tired eyes and just said, "You know, the kids asked today if Singapore is farther away than Grandma's house." And that just, it broke me. Here I was, a master of routes and destinations, and my own kids thought my job was some mythical place on the other side of the universe. That night, I made a promise. To her, to them, to myself. I told her, when I hit 40, we're cashing out. We're taking a year, and we're going to see this country. No more mapping it out for other people. We're going to have our own damn adventure. Of course, me being me, I didn't just leave it at that. The next day, I bought a 3-inch binder and a pack of plastic page protectors. I printed out a map of the United States and put it in the very first sleeve. Laura laughed when she saw it, called it Operation Freedom. The name stuck. For the next decade, that binder became my Bible. It started simple, a savings plan spreadsheet, a list of national parks we wanted to see, but it grew. Oh, it grew. I had tabs for everything. Optimal routes to avoid summer heat in the Southwest, the best months to see the fall colors in New England, a detailed analysis of state tax laws regarding long-term travel. I had a whole section on the best local diners within a 5-mile radius of every major landmark on our route. Laura thought I was nuts, but she played along. She'd add her own stuff, lesson plans based on the historical sites we'd visit, lists of books for the kids to read about each state. The kids got into it too. They had their own section in the binder, pages torn from magazines with pictures of mountains they wanted to climb and weird roadside attractions they wanted to see. That binder wasn't just a plan, it was our family's shared dream, bound in cheap plastic. When it came time to actually put the plan in motion, the first big step was the house. We were moving out of our starter home, and we had one non-negotiable requirement. It wasn't a gourmet kitchen or a walk-in closet, it was a long, flat, wide driveway, a proper docking station. We looked at dozens of houses. Realtors would be showing us these beautiful master bathrooms, and I'd be in the front yard with a tape measure checking the grade of the driveway. We finally found it. This nice, solid 2-story house in a quiet, well-kept neighborhood. And it had the driveway. It was perfect. Of course, it was in a neighborhood with a homeowners association. I'd heard the horror stories, so I did my due diligence. I got a copy of the HOA covenants and read the entire thing, front to back. I'm a logistics guy, remember? Details are my thing. It was full of the usual stuff. Grass can't be more than 4 inches high, no sheds without approval, trash cans have to be hidden. I saw the rules about no commercial vehicles, no boats, no trailers left unhitched. But I searched every page, every clause, every addendum. Not a single word about a registered motorhome, a self-propelled vehicle. In my mind, a vehicle is a vehicle. You can park your F-350 pickup truck in the driveway, why not a Ford chassis RV? I figured we were in the clear. Big check mark in the binder. Then came the final piece of the puzzle, the vessel itself. We spent 6 months searching. We didn't have a ton of money, so a new one was out of the question. We wanted something with character, something that felt like it already had a few stories to tell. We finally found her in a used lot just outside of Sacramento, a 30-foot Class C motorhome. She wasn't perfect, she had a few dings and the upholstery was a little dated, but the engine was solid and the layout was perfect. The moment we stepped inside, Laura looked at me and whispered, "This is it." We named her the Wanderer. I'll never forget the day I drove the Wanderer home. The kids were practically bouncing off the walls. They ran inside, claiming their bunks, opening and closing every little cabinet. We spent the whole afternoon in the driveway, just sitting in it, imagining. We weren't in a suburb in Northern California anymore. We were parked at the rim of the Grand Canyon. We were driving through the misty forests of the Pacific Northwest. We were watching the sunrise over the Atlantic. That RV sitting there in our driveway. It was more than just a vehicle. It was a promise kept. It was a decade of late nights, 1,000 packed lunches, and all the overtime I'd ever worked, all sitting right there in front of us. It was the tangible proof that our dream, our Operation Freedom, was finally real. And now, as I stood there watching a tow truck drag it away with that smug woman watering her flowers across the street, all of that joy, all of that hope, it was being replaced by a cold, hard knot of dread in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't just about a parking dispute anymore. This was an attack on the dream itself. So before the tow truck, before all the real insanity started, we actually had a few good weeks. A little honeymoon period with the Wanderer. It just sat there in the driveway, this big, beautiful symbol of our future. I'd spend weekends out there, flushing the water tanks, testing the generator, little things. The kids basically turned it into their own private clubhouse. I'd find them inside with flashlights, reading comic books in the bunks, even though it was the middle of the day. It was nice. It felt right. Of course, I started to notice her. Karen Jenkins. You know the type. Her lawn looks like it was cut with scissors, not a blade of grass out of place. Her house is a perfect, sterile shade of beige, and she has these little decorative flags she changes out for every single holiday, no matter how minor. I'd be out there tinkering with the RV's propane system, and I'd see her on her evening walk. She'd come down the street with her little white puffball of a dog, the kind that probably costs more per month than my first car, and she'd slow down as she passed my house. She wouldn't stare, not overtly, she'd just scan. Her eyes would pan over my lawn, my house, and then they'd settle on the Wanderer for just a second too long. It was a look of profound disapproval, like she'd just smelled sour milk. Then she'd sniff, tug the leash on her ridiculously named dog, I think it's called Sir Reginald Fluffington III or something, and continue on her way. Her husband Gary was usually with her. He's a big guy, retired cop, has that permanent look of mild annoyance that a lot of cops get. He'd just nod at me, a tight little dip of the head that wasn't exactly friendly. I didn't think much of it. I figured, okay, they're not thrilled with the giant RV, but it's my property. I checked the rules. What are they going to do? I was so naive. The first shot was fired about a month after we brought the Wanderer home. It wasn't a brick through the window or anything dramatic. It was quiet, insidious, and arrived in a crisp, cream-colored envelope with the HOA's logo embossed in the corner. Just seeing it in the mailbox gave me a little jolt of anxiety. Nothing good ever comes in an official HOA envelope. I opened it in the kitchen. Laura was making dinner, and she watched my face as I read it. The letter was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive corporate speak. It didn't accuse me of anything. It welcomed me to the neighborhood. It praised the value of aesthetic harmony and shared community standards. Then it got to the point. It has come to the attention of the Architectural Committee, it read, that a large recreational vehicle is being stored on your property. We would like to kindly remind you of Section 7, Subsection C of the Community Bylaws, which prohibits the long-term parking of trailers, boats, and commercial vehicles. It went on to say that for the visual continuity of the neighborhood, I had 14 days to remove the vehicle. It was signed, cordially, the HOA board. But I knew exactly who wrote it. I could practically smell Karen's lavender-scented perfume on the paper. "What is it?" Laura asked, seeing the look on my face. I handed her the letter. "It's starting." Her shoulders slumped. "Oh, Tom, I knew it. I knew she was going to be a problem." "It's fine," I said, probably more to convince myself than her. "This is just a misunderstanding. They're misclassifying the vehicle." See, this is where my logistician brain kicked in. This wasn't a personal attack. Not yet. This was a data error. They had categorized my asset incorrectly, and I just needed to provide the correct documentation to resolve the issue. Anger wouldn't fix this. Facts would. So I didn't yell. I didn't storm over to her house. I went to my office, pulled out my copy of the HOA covenants, and laid it on the desk next to her letter. Then I went to the file where I kept all the paperwork for the Wanderer. I was calm. This was a problem, and problems have solutions. I sat down and wrote a letter back. I was polite, professional, almost cheerful. I thanked them for their letter and for their commitment to keeping the neighborhood beautiful. Then I laid out my case point by point. Regarding Section 7C, I wrote, I believe there has been a slight misunderstanding. The bylaw specifically mentions trailers, boats, and commercial vehicles. My vehicle, the Wanderer, does not fall into any of these categories. I explained that a trailer is, by definition, unpowered and must be towed, whereas my RV is a fully registered, self-propelled motor vehicle, legally no different from a large van or SUV. I attached a copy of the official California DMV registration, where the vehicle class was clearly listed as motorhome. I also attached a friendly-looking photo of the RV showing the driver's cab to visually distinguish it from a trailer. I ended the letter by saying I was confident this cleared up the confusion and that I looked forward to being a productive member of the community. I even signed it warmly, Tom Hayes. Take that, cordially. I sealed the envelope, put a stamp on it, and walked it out to our mailbox. As I dropped it in and flipped the little red flag up, I felt a sense of relief, a sense of accomplishment even. I had met her bureaucratic nonsense with clear, undeniable facts. It was a clean, logical solution to a simple clerical error. In my world of systems and processes, that's how you resolve a conflict. You present the correct data, and the system corrects itself. I really, truly believed that would be the end of it. How could they argue with the DMV? How could they argue with the dictionary definition of a trailer? It was airtight. I went back inside and told Laura not to worry, I'd handled it. Problem identified, data presented, solution implemented. That's how it's supposed to work, right? Of course, it wasn't the end of it, not even close. For about a week, there was silence. Every day I'd check the mail, half expecting a letter of apology. So sorry for the mix-up, Mr. Hayes. Have a nice day. Nothing. I started to think my perfectly logical letter had worked. I thought maybe they'd discussed it at their little HOA board meeting and realized they didn't have a leg to stand on. Then the second envelope came. Same cream-colored paper, same embossed logo. Only this time, the tone wasn't so cordial. This letter informed me that the board had reviewed my correspondence and, after careful consideration, had decided my interpretation was incorrect. And get this, they wrote that the original drafters of the bylaws in the 1980s intended for the term trailer to be a catch-all for any large, non-standard vehicle used for recreational purposes. It was a spirit of the law argument. They were literally inventing intent from 30 years ago to suit their needs. It was the most ridiculous circular logic I'd ever seen. I've dealt with customs officials in foreign countries who made more sense. The letter concluded by saying that a new clarification had been added to the official rulebook to reflect this original intent. My RV was now, by their own magical decree, a trailer. My 14-day notice period was over, and I was now being fined $50 for every day the vehicle remained on my property. The fine was retroactive to the end of the original notice period. I already owed them $350. I just stood in my kitchen, reading and rereading that letter, a low buzzing sound starting in my ears. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was a targeted attack. They had changed the rules of the game in the middle of the fourth quarter because they didn't like the score. That's it, I said to Laura, slapping the letter down on the counter. She's just making it up as she goes. Laura picked it up, her face pale. $50 a day? Tom, they can't do that. Apparently they can, I said. The fines kept coming. Every few days, a new envelope with a new, higher number inside. It felt like we were being held hostage. Then, about 2 weeks into this new phase of the war, it escalated. I went out one morning to grab the paper, and something just looked off. The Wanderer seemed to be sagging on one side. I walked closer, and my stomach just dropped into my shoes. Both tires on the right side of the RV were completely flat, slashed open with a knife. There were long, jagged gashes in the thick rubber. This wasn't a slow leak. This was deliberate. Vicious. My first call was to the police. I was shaking with a mixture of rage and fear. Someone had come onto my property with a knife and destroyed my property. That's a crime. A real crime, not some made-up HOA violation. An officer showed up about an hour later. He was young, looked bored, and chewed gum with his mouth open. He took a slow walk around the RV, kicked one of the flat tires, and pulled out a notepad. "You have any idea who might have done this?" he asked, without a hint of actual interest. "I have a pretty good idea," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I explained the whole situation with the HOA, the letters, the fines. I told him about the president, Karen Jenkins. The officer just sighed, like I was telling him the plot of a boring movie he'd already seen. "Look, sir," he said, clicking his pen. "You got any proof? Any cameras that saw who did it?" "No, I don't have cameras," I said. "Who has cameras pointed at their own driveway?" "Well," he said, snapping his notepad shut, Without any witnesses or video, there's not much we can do. It's vandalism, probably some local kids. I'll file a report." And that was it. He got in his car and drove away. No dusting for prints, no talking to the neighbors, nothing. It was then that I remembered his patrol car had the same little "Support Our Vets" bumper sticker as the one on Gary Jenkins's truck. The retired cop. My complaint was dead on arrival. That was the moment the logistician in me woke up. The part of me that doesn't just get mad, but gets organized. If the system wasn't going to provide me with data, I would have to collect it myself. That evening, I was online for hours, researching. I didn't buy some cheap security system from a big box store. I ordered 4 high-resolution, weatherproof, night vision-capable cameras and a cloud-based recording system that couldn't be tampered with. 2 days later, I spent an entire Saturday on a ladder, running wires, positioning them for perfect coverage of my driveway, my yard, and the street in front of my house. I was done being a victim. From now on, everything would be documented. While I was fortifying my property, Karen was waging a different kind of war. A quieter one. I started noticing a change in the neighborhood. A couple down the street who used to wave every time I drove by now suddenly found something fascinating to look at on the ground whenever I passed. The guy next door, who I'd borrowed a wrench from just a month before, started avoiding eye contact. I could only imagine the stories she was spreading at her little neighborhood coffee clatches. That I was a troublemaker. That I was lowering property values. That my big, ugly RV was a danger to their children. She was isolating me. The next attack came a week after I installed the cameras. It was subtler this time. I was washing my car when the sun hit the side of the Wanderer just right, and I saw it. A long, thin, jagged line running almost the entire length of the vehicle. It was a key scratch, deep, right down to the metal. It was ugly and hateful, a permanent scar. My heart pounded as I ran inside and pulled up the camera footage on my computer. I rewound to the middle of the night, and there it was. A figure in a dark hoodie and jeans, head down, walking briskly along the side of the RV. I could see the motion of their arm, the glint of something metal in their hand, but the face was completely obscured by the hood. It was infuriating. I had them on camera, clear as day, but it was useless. It could have been anyone. The final straw, the thing that led to me standing in my kitchen with spilled coffee, happened about a week after that. I came home from work to find another one of those cream envelopes, but this one wasn't in my mailbox. It was taped to my front door. It wasn't a fine notice. It was a final notice of violation and intent to remedy. It was a page of pure legal gibberish, citing city ordinances about public nuisances and abandoned vehicles, none of which applied to a legally registered vehicle on private property. It stated that if the nuisance vehicle was not removed within 48 hours, the HOA would take all necessary steps to have it removed at the homeowner's expense. It was signed by the whole board. It was a declaration of war. I called a lawyer. He told me they were on shaky legal ground, but that fighting it would require an emergency injunction and thousands of dollars I didn't have. He advised me to move the RV to a storage facility for a month to de-escalate, while he sent them a strongly worded letter. De-escalate? They were vandalizing my property and threatening to steal my vehicle from my own driveway. I didn't move it. I couldn't. It was a matter of principle. This was my home. And that brings us to that Saturday morning. I was woken up not by an alarm, but by the low rumble of a diesel engine and the unmistakable, high-pitched beep, beep, beep of a large truck backing up. I stumbled to the window and my blood ran cold. There it was. A massive flatbed tow truck was maneuvering into position in front of my house. And right behind it, lights off but engine running, was a city police car, providing an escort. And that's when I saw Karen, standing there watering her petunias, a queen overseeing the execution of her enemy. My enemy, and my dream. You'd think that after watching your life's dream get illegally towed from your own driveway, your first instinct would be to call 911. But who do you call when the cops are already there, watching it happen? That's a level of helpless, upside-down reality that I just wasn't prepared for. For a minute, I just stood there, completely paralyzed. Then the adrenaline kicked in, a hot, angry wave of it. Laura came up behind me, putting a hand on my arm. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm going down there," I said, grabbing my car keys. "I'm going to the police station. This is theft. I don't care who's friends with whom. This is grand theft auto." I drove to the station like a man possessed. I walked in clutching a folder full of documents like it was a holy shield. I had the deed to my house, the RV's title, the registration, my copy of the HOA bylaws, all my precious data. I strode up to the front desk, ready to unleash a firestorm of righteous, well-documented fury. The guy behind the thick plexiglass was a big, beefy sergeant with a mustache that looked like it had its own zip code. He listened to my frantic story with an expression of profound boredom. I laid out the whole thing, the harassment, the vandalism, the illegal towing from private property with one of his own officers providing an escort. When I finished, breathless, he just slowly blinked at me. "So," he said, his voice a low rumble, "this is an HOA dispute." "No," I insisted, "this is a vehicle theft. It was taken from my property without my consent." He sighed and leaned into his microphone. "Sir, an officer was on scene. It was a civil standby to prevent a breach of the peace while a vehicle was repossessed by a private entity, your HOA." "Repossessed? I own it outright. They don't have a lien on it," I said, my voice getting louder. I was practically shouting through the little speaker hole in the glass. He held up a hand. "Look, son, I know Gary Jenkins. Known him for 20 years. He's a good man. He wouldn't be involved in anything that wasn't by the book. This is a civil matter between you and your homeowners association. You need to talk to a lawyer, not to me." He stamped a form in front of him and pointedly turned his attention to it, a clear dismissal. I was talking to a brick wall, a big, mustachioed brick wall that played golf with my enemy's husband. I walked out of that police station feeling smaller than I ever had in my life. The one system that's supposed to protect you from theft had just told me they were officially on the side of the thieves. My next stop was even more humiliating, the impound lot. It was one of those places out by the airport, surrounded by a rusty chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. It was a prison for cars. The guy in the office, who had more tattoos than teeth, charged me an obscene amount of money. There was the towing fee, a daily storage fee, a gate fee, and my personal favorite, a lien processing fee, even though there was no lien. It was pure, unadulterated extortion. I paid it, over $900 on my credit card, just to get back the property that was stolen from me a few hours earlier. When they finally brought the wanderer out, I did a slow walk around. My heart sank. There was a new dent on the rear bumper and a long black scuff mark on the side where it must have scraped against something. They had damaged it. It was like they had taken my dream, beaten it up, and then charged me for the privilege of seeing the bruises. Getting it back felt like a hollow victory because I knew nothing was solved. It was sitting back in my driveway, a giant target. That night, Laura and I had a long talk. She was terrified. "This is insane, Tom," she said, pacing the living room. "They're vandalizing our home, the police won't help, and now we're out $1,000. What's next? Are they going to start breaking our windows?" "There's an HOA meeting next week," I said. "I'm going to go. I'm going to talk to everyone. They have to listen to reason. When the other homeowners hear what's actually happening, they won't stand for it." Laura just looked at me with sad eyes. "You still believe in reason, don't you?" I spent the next week preparing for that meeting like a lawyer preparing for a Supreme Court case. I had my documents in order. I made copies of the threatening letters and the bill from the impound lot. I had a calm, rational speech prepared. I was going to appeal to my neighbors as fellow homeowners, as reasonable people. The meeting was held in the drab linoleum-floored community clubhouse. The air smelled like stale coffee and defeat. Karen Jenkins sat at the head table, flanked by her two board member cronies, looking regal and smug. I sat in the front row, my folder on my lap, waiting for the open forum section of the agenda. When my turn came, I walked to the front and stood at the little podium. "Hi, everyone," I started. "My name is Tom Hayes. I live at 214 Oak Street." I got about 30 seconds into my speech before Karen cut me off. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "I'm going to have to stop you there. This portion of the meeting is for general community announcements, not for airing personal grievances regarding enforcement actions." "This isn't a personal grievance," I said, my hands gripping the podium. "This affects all of us. The board is overstepping its authority, changing rules without a proper vote, and authorizing illegal—" "That's enough," she snapped, the sweet facade vanishing. "You are out of order." A man I recognized as one of her board members stood up. "Some of us actually like the fact that the board is proactive in protecting our property values," he said, looking around for approval. "We don't want our neighborhood to start looking like a trailer park." A few people clapped. My face burned with humiliation. I tried to speak again, but Karen just talked over me, announcing the next agenda item about the annual pet parade. It was a total ambush, a public takedown. I stood there for a moment, papers in my hand, as the whole meeting just moved on, leaving me standing there like a fool. I walked back to my seat, my ears ringing. I didn't hear another word that was said. I drove home in total silence. I had tried to fight this thing on every front. I had tried logic, the law, and direct appeals to my community. And I had failed. Spectacularly. Every door had been slammed in my face. I walked into the house, and Laura knew just from the look on my face. I slumped down onto the couch and put my head in my hands. All the fight was just gone, drained out of me. Laura sat down next to me quietly. Maybe it's not worth it, she said softly, almost a whisper. Maybe we just move the wanderer to a storage place. We pay the fines. We give up. And the worst part was, for the first time in this whole ordeal, I couldn't find a single reason to tell her she was wrong. What was the point? We were beaten. The whole world felt like it was rigged, and I was fresh out of ideas. I just sat there in the dark, feeling the crushing weight of it all. I had nothing left. For a few days after that disastrous HOA meeting, the house was like a tomb. The fight had just gone out of me. It was one thing to be angry, to feel like you're on the right side of things. It's another thing entirely to be publicly humiliated, to have your own neighbors applaud while you're being shut down. It felt like the whole world had tilted on its axis, and I was the only one who hadn't gotten the memo that facts don't matter anymore. I'd catch Laura looking at RV storage websites on her laptop, and she'd quickly close the tab when I walked in. I was doing the same thing. We were communicating in failure, silently agreeing to surrender. The Wanderer sat in the driveway, not as a symbol of our dream anymore, but as this huge, 30-foot monument to my own stubborn stupidity. Every time I looked at it, I just felt sick. One night, I couldn't sleep. I was in my office, just staring at the wall. The big binder, Operation Freedom, was on my desk, and I couldn't even bring myself to look at it. Instead, I found myself just clicking through the security camera footage from the night of the scratching. I don't know why. Maybe I was just torturing myself, I don't know. I watched the hooded figure walk up, drag the key across the paint, and walk away. Useless. I was about to close the program when, out of sheer morbid curiosity, I replayed the moment the figure turned to leave. There it was again, the little white speck that fell from the hoodie pocket onto my lawn. The first time I saw it, I dismissed it. It was too small, too blurry, but now, in my state of exhausted defeat, my brain just kind of fixated on it. What was that? It was a loose thread in a tapestry of failure, a tiny piece of data I hadn't fully analyzed. On a weird, unexplainable impulse, I grabbed the heavy mag light from the kitchen drawer and went outside. It was late, the street was dead silent. I felt like a crazy person, wandering around my own front lawn in my pajamas, shining a flashlight into the grass. I went to the exact spot I'd pinpointed from the camera angle. I swept the beam of light back and forth, and then I saw it. Nestled in the damp grass was a small, star-shaped biscuit. A dog treat. I stared at it for a full minute. My brain was churning. It was just a dog treat. It meant nothing, but it was specific. I'd seen it before. I picked it up. It smelled faintly of pumpkin. And then it hit me. A jolt, like I'd touched a live wire. The neighborhood block party from a month ago. Karen Jenkins holding her yappy little dog, cornering our new neighbor from down the street. I remembered standing there, trapped, trying to escape the conversation as Karen launched into a 10-minute monologue. It was about her dog's incredibly sensitive stomach and the specialty organic gluten-free pumpkin and quinoa Star biscuits. She had to have shipped in from some boutique pet bakery in Oregon because, and I quote, "commercial treats are full of poison." I stood there on my lawn, in the dark, holding this little star-shaped biscuit in my palm. My heart started hammering against my ribs. It wasn't proof, not the kind you see on TV, but it was her. I knew it, in my gut, with every fiber of my being. The sheer, blinding arrogance of committing a crime with your dog's ridiculously expensive bespoke treats in your pocket. A whole new kind of energy started to flood through me. The exhaustion vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp-edged clarity. My brain, the logistician's brain that had been dormant for days, flickered back to life. I had a new working hypothesis. My opponent was not just malicious, she was arrogant, and arrogant people get sloppy. If she was this sloppy with the crime itself, what about the rules she was using to justify it? I went back inside, my mind racing. I grabbed my copy of the HOA covenants. I'd read it a dozen times. It was a flimsy 20-page document, badly photocopied. But what was it a copy of? Where did it come from? An HOA is a corporation, but a housing development. That's a legal entity created by a developer. There had to be a foundational document, a charter, something filed with the county when the land was first turned from dirt into houses. The bylaws were just the day-to-day rulebook. I needed to find the Constitution. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I told my boss I had a family emergency, which didn't feel like a lie. I drove down to the county records office. The place was a time capsule. It smelled like old paper and dust. I spent an hour figuring out how to even use the ancient microfiche machine. I was looking for the original parcel maps and development plans for our subdivision. Creekwood Estates, filed in 1988. I scrolled through endless pages of technical drawings, land surveys, and utility easement declarations. My eyes started to burn from staring at the glowing green text. I was about to give up, thinking this was another dead end. Then I found it, a document titled Master Plan and Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions for Creekwood Estates. This was it. This was the source code. I scrolled slowly, my finger tracing the lines on the screen. It was mostly dense legalese, but then I got to a section titled Article 4, Homeowner Rights and Privileges. My pulse quickened, and there, nestled between a clause about roofing materials and another about fence height, was Section 2D. My eyes locked onto the text. To promote the recreational enjoyment of the community, each individual homeowner shall be entitled to the parking and temporary storage of one registered and operational recreational vehicle, Class B or Class C, upon their designated private driveway. I read it again, and a third time. It wasn't ambiguous, it wasn't open to interpretation. It was a clear, foundational, legally recorded right. It had been there all along, buried in a dusty county archive, while Karen Jenkins was running the neighborhood with her flimsy, incomplete copy of the rules, a copy that had conveniently omitted this entire section. She probably didn't even know it existed. She'd only ever read the Cliff's Notes version, and she thought it was the whole book. I felt a wild, giddy laugh bubbling up in my chest. I walked over to the clerk, paid $10 for 3 certified, stamped copies of that page. The clerk looked at me like I was crazy, grinning from ear to ear as I paid for a photocopy of a 30-year-old zoning document. I walked out of that building and into the bright sunshine, clutching that folder to my chest. It felt like I was holding a winning lottery ticket. No, it was better than that. It felt like I was holding a weapon. The game hadn't changed. I'd just been playing it all wrong. I finally had the real rulebook. And now I was going to write a new plan. Not a plan for a vacation, a plan for a counterattack. I didn't even speed on the way home from the county records office. I drove with both hands on the wheel, the folder with the certified copies resting on the passenger seat like a visiting dignitary. The raw, frantic energy I'd felt was settling into something else, something cold, heavy, and incredibly calm. It was the same feeling I get at work right before launching a multi-million-dollar shipment across 3 continents. It's the feeling of knowing you've checked every box, anticipated every variable, and you're holding a plan that is watertight. I walked into the house and spread the documents out on the kitchen table like they were battle plans. Laura came over, her eyes wide. I pointed to the certified page from the master plan. "What is it?" she asked. "It's the Constitution," I said. "The real one, not the cheap knockoff Karen has been using to beat us over the head." I explained what I'd found. As I talked, I saw her expression change from weary resignation to disbelief, and then to a slow dawning, cautious hope. I then told her about the dog treat. She stared at me, then she actually let out a short, sharp laugh. "You're kidding me," she said. "Her ridiculous, overpriced dog cookies?" "Her ridiculous, overpriced dog cookies," I confirmed. "She's arrogant, and she got sloppy, and now I think we've got her." But I knew, with my newfound clarity, that having the evidence wasn't enough. I had the ammunition, but I wasn't a soldier. I needed a professional. Not one of the expensive, established lawyers who would charge me a fortune to write a polite letter. I needed someone different. I needed someone hungry, someone who would see this not as a nuisance case, but as an opportunity, a fighter. I spent the rest of the day online, not looking at firm websites, but at recent court filings. I was looking for a name, a lawyer who was taking on consumer rights cases, fighting banks or suing corporations on behalf of individuals. It was a logistician's approach. I was analyzing their work history. After a few hours, I found him. Marco Reyes, a young guy, only a few years out of law school, with his own small practice in a less than glamorous part of town. But his track record was impressive. He took cases no one else would touch, and he was winning. His office was on the 2nd floor of an old brick building above a taqueria. It was small, cluttered with files, and smelled faintly of carnitas and justice. Marco was a whirlwind of energy, a guy who talked with his hands and looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He listened to my story patiently, nodding, not saying much. I laid it all out, not as a rambling victim, but as a briefing. I had a timeline. I had a folder with every threatening letter, every fine notice, the bill from the impound lot, all organized chronologically. When I got to the part about the slashed tires and the dog treat, he raised an eyebrow. I could see a flicker of skepticism. But then I pushed the final folder across his desk, the certified copies from the county records office. He picked up the page with the RV clause and read it. He put it down, picked it up, and read it again. A slow grin spread across his face. He leaned back in his squeaky chair and looked at me with a whole new level of respect. "Mr. Hayes," he said, a genuine excitement in his voice, "I've seen a lot of HOA cases. They're usually a nightmare of he said, she said, and vague bylaws. This is different. This is a breach of a foundational covenant. This is a smoking gun." He tapped the photo of the dog treat I'd taken with my phone. "And this is the cherry on top. This takes it from a contract dispute to a clear pattern of malicious harassment." He stood up and started pacing his small office. They didn't just bend the rules. They pretended the real rules didn't exist. And then they committed crimes to enforce their fake rules. Oh, this is beautiful. This is a work of art. That was exactly what I wanted to hear. "So what do we do?" I asked. "What we don't do," he said, pointing a finger at me, "is file a quiet little lawsuit that will drag on for 2 years. A win in court is one thing, but that doesn't solve your core problem. Your problem is a dictator who has brainwashed her subjects. We don't just need to win, we need to dismantle her entire power structure. We need to launch a coup." He grabbed a legal pad and a pen. "We're going to wage a 3-front war," he said, scribbling furiously. "For the time, it's high and team. Front number 1, the legal attack." He drew a line. "I'll draft a cease and desist letter from hell. It goes to the entire board, not just Karen. We put every single one of them on notice that they are personally, financially liable for damages, legal fees, and for enforcing rules they knew, or should have known, were invalid. We cite the master plan. We demand full, immediate reimbursement for the tow, the impound fees, and the cost of the new tires. We demand a public written apology to you and this community. We give them 48 hours to comply." Front number 2, the criminal complaint. He drew another line. "You and I are going to bypass the local precinct entirely. We're taking your evidence, the video of the vandal, the physical dog treat, which I want you to put in a Ziploc bag right now, your sworn statement about her previous comments, and we're filing a formal criminal complaint directly with the district attorney's office. We're going over Gary's friends' heads. Let's see how they like explaining this to a prosecutor." He paused and looked at me, a glint in his eye. "And now for my favorite part. Front number 3, the propaganda war." This was where my logistician's heart sang. "I've already got an idea for that," I said, leaning forward. "We create a briefing packet for every single homeowner in the neighborhood." Marco's grin widened. "Yes, tell me." "A simple 1-page cover letter," I explained, "explaining that we've all been operating under an incomplete and invalid set of rules. Attached to it, a clean copy of Article 4, Section 2D of the Master Plan, the RV Clause. We also include a simple bullet point timeline of the board's actions, the illegal fines, the illegal towing, the use of HOA funds to commit a crime against a homeowner. We don't make it emotional. We make it factual. We show them that Karen's actions haven't protected their property values. They've exposed the entire community to a massive lawsuit. We show them she isn't a protector. She's a liability." Marco sat back down, looking at me with pure admiration. "You're a damn logistician, all right," he said with a laugh. "You don't just want to win the battle, you want to cut off their supply lines and salt the earth behind them." "Exactly," I said. We spent the next 2 days preparing. Marco worked on the legal documents, his keyboard clicking away furiously. I was at my dining room table, which had become my own personal war room. I designed the briefing packet. I printed 150 copies. I stuffed the envelopes. Laura, now fully on board, acted as my proofreader and moral support. The fear was gone from her eyes, replaced by the same cold resolve I felt. By the end of the second day, it was all done. A stack of lethal legal documents sat on Marco's desk. A box of stuffed, sealed, and addressed envelopes sat by my front door. Every piece was in place. Every contingency was planned. All the assets were ready for deployment. All that was left was to give the green light. The morning we chose to launch the counterattack, the air itself felt different. It was a Tuesday. Marco and I had synchronized our watches, a bit dramatic maybe, but it felt right. He had his marching orders, filed a criminal complaint with the DA's office first thing in the morning, then, just before lunch, personally served the cease and desist letter to Karen at her home, making a point to hand separate copies to her husband, Gary, and the other 2 board members who lived in the neighborhood. My job was quieter, but just as crucial. It was Operation Mail Slot. I was up before the sun, a thermos of black coffee next to me. The box of 150 briefing packets sat by the door. At first light, while the neighborhood was still wrapped in that sleepy, pre-commute silence, I slipped out. I moved like a ghost, going from house to house, my footsteps silent on the dew-covered lawns. I didn't use the mailboxes, that's a federal offense. Instead, I quietly slid each envelope through the mail slot in their front door or tucked it securely behind their screen door. It felt incredibly subversive. For months, I'd felt like a prisoner in this neighborhood. Now, I was its liberator, delivering tiny paper bombs full of truth right to the heart of the enemy's territory. It took me almost 2 hours. By the time I slipped back into my own house, the sun was fully up, and the first wave of my assault was complete. The call from Marco came just before noon. He was buzzing with energy. "Phase 1 and 2 are a go," he said, his voice crackling with excitement. DA's office took the file. The receptionist looked at me like I was crazy until she saw the words HOA president and vandalism on the same line. They'll be looking at it. But the best part? Serving them. Oh, Tom, I wish you could have been there. "What happened?" I asked, pacing my living room. "I went to Karen's first," he said. "She answered the door in her tennis whites, looking all smug and powerful. I handed her the envelope. She looked at it, saw my letterhead, and literally laughed. She said, 'Are you Mr. Hayes' little lawyer? He needs to learn when he's beaten.' Then she started to close the door. So I said, 'Before you do that, you should know this letter is also being served to the other board members, putting them on notice of their personal liability in this matter. And a second copy is for your husband, Gary, since I'm sure he'll be interested in the formal criminal complaint we just filed with the district attorney's office, the one with the video evidence.'" Tom, her face, it was incredible. The tan just seemed to drain away. The smirk vanished. It was like I'd just told her that her precious little dog had run away. Marco continued, "The other board members were even better. The treasurer, a guy named Dave, he went pale. He actually started sweating. The other one, some lady who lives on the cul-de-sac, she just stared at the letter like it was a live snake. I think we have their attention." For the rest of the day, a strange quiet fell over the neighborhood, but it wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the silence of 150 households reading something that was making their blood boil. Around 3 o'clock, it started. I saw my next-door neighbor, the one who'd been avoiding my gaze, walk out to his curb, pick up his phone, and make a call. Then 2 houses down, a woman came out and started talking animatedly to the guy across the street from her. The neighborhood text chain, which I wasn't on, but Laura was, started to light up. At first, it was just questions. "Did anyone else get this packet?" Then it turned to shock. "Is this legal? Can they do that?" And then slowly it turned to anger. "She used our money to tow his RV." The fortress of silence Karen had built around me was crumbling brick by brick. Her desperate countermove came just as it was getting dark. My doorbell camera chimed on my phone. I looked at the screen, and there they were, Karen and Gary standing on my porch. They weren't smiling. I answered through the speaker. "Can I help you?" Karen's voice was tight, furious. "We need to talk to you, Tom, right now." Gary stepped forward, trying to use his old cop presence to intimidate me. "Turn off the camera and open the door, Hayes. Let's talk about this like men." My heart was hammering, but my voice was steady. This was a moment I'd replayed in my head. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Gary," I said, my voice calm and clear through the tiny speaker. "First of all, you're on private property and you're being recorded. Second, as of noon today, all communication must be directed to my legal counsel, Marco Reyes. I'm sure you have his number. It's on the letterhead of the documents he served you." Karen's face contorted with rage. "You can't hide behind a lawyer, you little coward," she hissed. "I'm not hiding, Karen," I replied, and it felt so good to say it. "I'm just following the proper procedure, something you might want to learn about. Have a good night." I ended the connection. They stood on my porch for another 30 seconds, fuming, before finally turning around and stomping back across the street. I hadn't just won the confrontation, I had denied them one. I had used the system, the rules, to completely neutralize them. That little porch showdown was the final straw for the neighborhood. News of it spread like wildfire. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I didn't know. "This is Bill Adams from down the street. What that woman is doing is a disgrace. A bunch of us are talking. We're calling for an emergency meeting. We're taking our neighborhood back." Then another text came in. And another. People apologizing. People offering support. People asking what they could do to help. The isolation was over. The tide hadn't just turned, it was a tsunami. The very community she had tried to turn against me was now sharpening their pitchforks, and they were pointed directly at her front door. The plan was working better than I could have ever imagined. The week leading up to the emergency meeting was one of the strangest of my life. I went from being the neighborhood pariah to some kind of reluctant folk hero. People would stop me when I was getting the mail to shake my hand. The guy next door, who had been avoiding me for weeks, brought over a 6-pack of beer and apologized, saying he'd let Karen's rumors get to him. It was awkward and humbling and incredibly validating all at once. The neighborhood was buzzing. You could feel it in the air. The informational packets had done their job. They'd armed everyone with the same set of facts, and the story they told was undeniable. Bill Adams, the quiet retiree from down the street, had become the de facto general of this little suburban uprising. He and a few other longtime residents had followed the HOA's own arcane procedures to the letter to force the emergency meeting. They were using the system to dismantle the system. It was beautiful. The night of the meeting, the community clubhouse was packed. It was standing room only. The last time I was here, I had been shouted down in a half-empty room that smelled of despair. Tonight, the air was electric with a kind of revolutionary fervor. Laura was next to me, her hand holding mine so tightly her knuckles were white. We weren't in the front row this time. We sat in the middle of the crowd, just 2 more members of the community. I didn't need to be at the front. My work was done. Karen, Dave, and Susan, the board, were at the front table, but they didn't look like a board. They looked like defendants at a sentencing. Dave was sweating profusely, staring at his notes. Susan was looking at her lap. And Karen was trying to project an aura of control, but it wasn't working. Her face was a tight mask of fury, her eyes darting around the room, finding only angry and determined faces looking back at her. The power had already left her. This was just the formal execution. Bill Adams stood up and went to the podium. He wasn't a charismatic speaker, but his voice was steady and clear, filled with the simple authority of a man who knows he's right. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "We are here tonight because a formal petition, signed by over 40% of the homeowners in this community, was filed to hold this emergency meeting. The single item on the agenda is a motion to vote on the removal of the current board of directors." A murmur went through the crowd. Karen started to speak, but Bill held up a hand. "You will have a chance to respond, Karen, but first we're going to lay out the reasons for this motion so that everyone is clear on the facts." And then he systematically, calmly, took her entire regime apart, using my briefing packet as his script. He held up a copy of the Master Plan Covenant. "Exhibit A," he said, his voice ringing through the room. "For years we've been told what we can and can't do based on an incomplete set of rules. We now know that our foundational documents grant us rights that have been hidden from us. This wasn't an oversight, it was a deception." He then moved on to the money. Exhibit B, the board, under Karen's leadership, used thousands of dollars of our collective funds to pursue a personal vendetta against a homeowner. They paid for an illegal tow from private property. They exposed every single one of us, this entire association, to a massive lawsuit. Our money was used to break the law. He let that sink in. People were shaking their heads, muttering to each other. "And finally," Bill said, his voice growing harder, "this wasn't just about rules. This was about harassment, vandalism, intimidation." Karen shot to her feet. "That is a slanderous lie," she shrieked. "This man is the one who has been harassing me." Before Bill could respond, a woman in the back stood up. It was my next-door neighbor's wife. "Is it a lie, Karen?" she called out. "Is it a lie that you and your husband showed up on his doorstep trying to intimidate him and his family? Because I saw you. My kids saw you. You were yelling at his doorbell." The room erupted. Karen's face went from white to a deep, blotchy red. She was speechless. Bill Adams called for order. "The motion on the table," he said, his voice cutting through the noise, "is the immediate removal of Karen Jenkins, David Richards, and Susan Miller from the board of directors for gross misconduct, breach of fiduciary duty, and actions taken against the interest of this community. All in favor, please raise your hand." It was a forest of angry, empowered hands shot into the air, mine and Laura's included. "All opposed?" 3 hands went up, Karen's, Dave's, and Susan's. Bill looked at them. "The motion carries," he said with a quiet finality. "You are hereby removed from the board, effective immediately." It was done. A wave of applause and cheers swept through the room. People were hugging, shaking hands. I saw Karen grab her purse and storm out the side door, her husband trailing behind her like a kicked dog. It was over. As people were milling about, my phone vibrated. It was Marco. "You watching the fireworks?" he asked. "You have no idea," I said, a huge grin spreading across my face. "Well, I've got some more for you," he said. "Just got off the phone with my contact at the DA's office. They're pressing charges, malicious mischief, and filing a false police report. She'll be getting served with a summons to appear in court sometime next week." I laughed, a real deep belly laugh of pure relief. It was the final nail in the coffin. A new interim board was elected on the spot with Bill Adams as the president. Their very first act was to unanimously pass a motion. First, to formally adopt the Forgotten RV Clause into the operating bylaws. Second, to rescind every fine that had been levied against me. And third, to issue a formal, written apology on behalf of the HOA for the harassment my family had endured, and to reimburse me for all costs related to the towing and the damage to my vehicle. The victory was absolute. It was legal, it was financial, and it was public. The Queen had been deposed, and the kingdom had been returned to the people, and my RV, the Wanderer, sitting quietly in my driveway, no longer looked like a monument to a problem. It looked once again like a promise. It's funny how quiet things can get after a storm. The months following that insane emergency meeting were, well, they were normal, and normal never felt so good. The neighborhood sort of exhaled, collectively. Bill Adams and the new interim board turned out to be exactly what an HOA should be: quiet, reasonable, and mostly invisible. They fixed the sprinklers at the front entrance, sent out a polite newsletter, and nobody heard a peep from them otherwise. It was bliss. As for Karen and Gary, we never spoke to them again. A for sale sign went up on their perfectly manicured lawn about a month after the meeting. I heard through the grapevine that her little house-flipping business had cratered. Turns out, when you get charged with vandalism and your face gets plastered all over the local news blog, people are less inclined to trust you with their biggest investment. They sold their house for less than they were asking and moved away. I don't know where they went, and I honestly don't care. I don't wish them ill, not really. I just wish them elsewhere. Their departure was the final quiet closing of a very loud chapter. Sometimes, when I'm out watering the lawn, I think about the whole crazy ordeal. I look at the folder on my desk, the one that started as Operation Freedom and turned into a battle plan. It's strange. I spent my whole life being the guy who avoids conflict, the planner who routes around problems instead of facing them head on. I believed that if you just had the right data and followed the rules, everything would work out. And this whole mess taught me that I was both completely right and completely wrong. The rules do matter. The facts do matter. But they don't mean a thing if you don't have the guts to stand up and fight for them when someone tries to tell you they don't exist. I learned that I had a spine I didn't know was there. I learned that my wife's quiet strength was more powerful than any loud threat. And I learned that you should never, ever underestimate a community's capacity for decency when they're finally shown the truth. I started this whole thing feeling completely isolated, and I ended it feeling more connected to my neighbors than I ever had before. But the best part of all is the Wanderer. It sits in the driveway, gleaming. For so long it was a source of stress, a target, a problem to be solved. Every time I looked at it, my stomach would clench. Now, when I see it, all I feel is a deep, profound sense of peace and excitement. The other day, I found the kids inside, poring over the big map of the U.S. we have taped to the wall. They weren't just dreaming anymore. They were debating. "We have to go to the giant ball of twine in Kansas," my son said, his finger jabbing the map. "No way," my daughter argued. "The Everglades are first. I want to see an alligator." I just stood there in the doorway, listening to them, and I felt this incredible wave of gratitude wash over me. The fight wasn't just about my right to park a vehicle in my driveway. It was for this exact moment. The freedom to choose between a ball of twine and an alligator. And that brings us to today. The house is locked up. Bill Adams has our spare key and is going to watch the place for us. The last of the bags are packed. The fridge is empty, the plants are watered, and the Wanderer is fully stocked, humming quietly in the driveway, ready to go. Laura takes one last look around. "You ready for this, Mr. Hayes?" she asks, a huge, brilliant smile on her face. "It's about time," I say, and I mean it. I climb into the driver's seat, the familiar feel of the wheel under my hands. I turn the key and the engine rumbles to life, a low, steady promise. I look in the rearview mirror, at my own house, at the quiet street, at the neighborhood that I fought for. Then I put the gear in drive. As we pull away from the curb, leaving Oak Street behind us, I realize the irony of it all. I'm a logistician, a man who spent a decade planning the perfect route across America. I thought I had accounted for every possibility. But I never could have planned for the detour I had to take first, the one that went right through my own front yard. I had to fight a war just to be able to leave for my vacation. And you know what? It made the start of this journey, this real journey, feel that much sweeter. The open road is finally in front of us, and for the first time in a long time, there's not a single roadblock in sight.